get a regular job, or would this be seen as something positive? And this is a very big contrast between California and New York on this dimension, and I suspect that's the deep cultural question that one would have to somehow tackle is somehow what is the polarity around this? I mean, I think in Japan, probably if you're an entrepreneur, it's seen as almost synonymous with being a criminal. And you know, a lot of people end up in jail, and maybe they are all criminals because anyone who's not a criminal would never even think of becoming an entrepreneur. So you know, these things can become self-fulfilling at some point. But I think Germany is somewhere between California and Japan. It's sort of going around the world the long way.
Statistics show indeed that most German entrepreneurs start a company to escape unemployment. So that's indeed the assumption that would be made at the dinner party, unfortunately. More questions for Peter Thiel. Does someone want to provoke Peter and defend going from 1 to n rather than 0 to 1? Any contrarian in the audience? Go ahead.
It's not really a contrary, but what I have is, as you talked very intense about the future, maybe in 25 years. What do you think will be the healthcare system, maybe in the US and Europe, in 25 years with all the technology, especially the IT technology, that at the moment is in place? Do you have any vision about it, any thoughts?
Well, it's a very, there certainly seem to be a lot of things that are incrementally going in the wrong direction, where the costs are escalating dramatically and quality is going up some, but not nearly as much as the cost. And this is a problem even more in the U.S. than in Western Europe. And I think I think you have to have them sort of develop in tandem. That's in sort of a whole set of economic, public policy questions around how do you encourage quality to go up without costs going up like crazy versus costs going up like crazy and quality not going up. So you can define technology as getting more for less, not less for more or the same for a lot more. I think the technology question around healthcare and biotech innovation, the optimistic one is that people will have longer, healthier lives, and the pessimistic one is that people will have longer lives but will just be unhealthy for a very long period of time. And I think that's we definitely want to avoid that second scenario. And so I think it is very important to, I think the particulars of a lot of these things will be very important. At the same time, my own, I think there are all these technological future scenarios you can describe which are worrisome and where things go wrong. But I think there's almost no future of the world that is good where we do not have technological progress. Just like, and the same thing's true of globalization. There are a lot of ways globalization can go wrong. It's this word that means so many different things, it almost means nothing. But there's certainly many forms of bad globalization we can envision. You can envision, all sorts of things that go haywire with it. But a future where globalization does not happen is almost certainly bad. And I think there are a lot of ways we can imagine technological progress being bad or problematic, but I cannot imagine a good future in which there's no technological progress. And globalization alone is one of the reasons for this. If you're going to give everybody in the world the quality of life that people have in the Western world, or even better, if you assume that people in the Western world are going to be better off in 20 or 30 years, and the world is going to converge to a standard of living, let's say, double or triple that of what people have today in the most advanced countries. You probably have enormous resource problems, environmental problems, all sorts of constraints if you do not have technological progress. And so I think for globalization to actually work, we need incredible amounts of technological progress. And I'm quite skeptical of the other mode, which is we should just dial down people's expectations, and the people in China shouldn't eat beef; they should just go back to eating cabbages, and we'll be fine. I don't think that actually works.
More questions for Peter Thiel? Go ahead, the monitor.
You encouraged people to think things which other people don't think, to feel in a way other people are not feeling. I think that's the best way to get not funded. If you remember back Werner von Braun started here in Berlin with his work. And if I'm trying to figure out if we would go today to a venture capitalist and he ask him, what's your plan? And he says, my plan is flying to the moon. What would happen today?
It would be difficult. It would be difficult to get funding, even from the government, I think. Which was, of course, where he ended up getting the money. And this is, I think this problem of conformity is perhaps an even bigger problem on the finance level than on the entrepreneur level. So I think there are a decent number of people trying to start new businesses who are thinking of new things. I think there is a very serious bottleneck on the investor side. That being said, one of the reasons I'm a venture capitalist is because I think there are precisely tremendous opportunities if you're one of the few entrepreneurs who thinks differently, you can do quite well. If you're one of the really few venture capitalists who thinks differently, that's probably also a very good place to be. The space thing is one of my colleagues from PayPal in 2002 went on to try to start a new aerospace company in Southern California called SpaceX, and basically they spent 6 years. It took 6 years to actually get the rocket to work, and they had some ideas about how to build these rockets at about 1/10 of the existing cost, and it was sort of taking some of the designs, simplifying them, using somewhat more computer modeling for some pieces, but just sort of a whole new cut on aerospace. And he was able to partially fund it himself. And I think at this point, it's going to be an incredibly successful company. They have about 2,000 people working for it in Southern California. They were undercutting the rocket costs by something like a factor of 10, and they have no competition because nobody else is starting a rocket company. And so the paradoxical other side is, the business model side, parenthetically, of the doing something different is you don't want to be doing something that everybody is doing. So, it's like there are lots of things you can do that other people are doing. You can open a restaurant here in Berlin. You can open a fast food restaurant. And you can come up with all sorts of reasons why it's different and you're on a particular street corner and it's different in this way or that way. But these are not real differences that matter. And it will not, you won't be able to ever, you'll have to be working 14 hours a day, all sorts of, every evening, very, very unpleasant. It will never scale. Even if it works, even if it's a great restaurant, you get a Michelin star, you have to work even harder around the clock. You can never stop because you're not ever getting out of this hyper-competitive dynamic. And so I think to the extent you want to have pricing power and avoid the craziest forms of competition, there is a lot to be said for trying to do something where you're simply not competing with other people.
Markus Burger.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question about your views on education that you said earlier. You said that modern education, even at the highest level, is often a mindless status race, or at least that people follow a path that a lot of other people take. And one of the reasons for that could be that people are just afraid to take risks, even at the highest or best institutions in the world. Do you have any ideas how that could change and how people can actually take risks and not go to law school, but do something different?
Well, I don't have any sort of completely categorical answers. I mean, I personally, of course, went to, a top U.S. university, and I went to a law school, and so, I sort of was guilty of doing all these things, and I'm not sure it's a bad thing intrinsically to do. If I had to do something over again, I would try to think about it a lot more, and I didn't. It was just automatic. I did not think about it. Just speaking about the U.S. context, what has happened is that for many decades, there was this increasing divergence between people with college education and people without college education, and you got paid a lot more if you had a college education. It was not that important, say, in 1970, became more important in 1980, even more 1990, even more 2000. The last decade, this trend has stopped, And if you were to actually adjust for the ever-increasing costs of college, and so if you looked at what's the incremental amount of money people make who go to college, and how long does it take them to pay off their college loans, and if you sort of use that as the metric, that time period has actually been expanding since 2000, so that the marginal benefit of a college education, while it increased for about 30 years, has started to go down in the last decade. And so I think we're sort of at a zone where it's at least something that people are much more open to thinking about. It's one of the places where, but again, it's not. There's no claim that this is, what everybody should be doing or anything remotely like that. I just think that it's something worth thinking about a great deal. The status thing I think has been a problem on many levels in the U.S. So you have cooking schools where people spend 4 years and $100,000 to get a $35,000 a year job as a chef in a restaurant, and there should be some way to learn to do this without taking on $100,000 in debt up front. And then even the very top universities where people are guaranteed to get very good positions, it ends up having this constraining effect where you've accumulated all this debt and you then have to get a high-paying job which may be more narrowly tracked and make it harder to pay things off. So I think there are sort of all these skews to it that are going to gradually get rethought. But I think in some ways the whole economic crisis of the last 3-4 years is pushing all these questions to a head.
So as you think about being a VC, and that's one of the groups that takes funds to invest in new ideas and takes risks, but you still have LPs, and you have a time horizon, and you have your own constraints there. So would you think that now we have a VCs, everybody's sheep, if they find a good idea, a lot of capital goes into it. Would you put a certain % of money aside as a VC and say, look, this is really for out-of-the-box thinking. Maybe nothing happens, maybe we learn something, and this other part has to go to something that we feel a bit better about because it looks like we're going to get a better hit and a better return in a certain period of time, so I can stay in business. What's your sense about that for the VC industry?
Yes, well, you have, yes, I think your point is well taken, that probably the conformism on the VC level is even greater on the LP level of people investing in VC funds. And so you have all these structural issues. I tend to think what you should be doing, again, I want to sort of, it's not about being nonconformist. This is not the single virtue that I'm advocating. So it's not what do you believe that nobody else believes. So you could say, I believe the earth is flat. Nobody else believes that. But it happens not to be true. The question is what is true and that other people do not believe. So it's not just the nonconformity part, and that's, it's important, but certainly not the only thing. What I would say we're most focused on is just trying to make really good investments, and you do tend to get massive pushback from the LPs on this, and the pushback normally takes the form of, you guys invested in Facebook, so are you investing in other social networking companies? And answer, well, we think maybe there isn't as much good there anymore, and the next Facebook, in a sense, will not be literally Facebook. By definition, it can't be. So if you're trying to copy people say, Mark Zuckerberg is like Bill Gates. They both went to Harvard, they both dropped out, they started great companies when they were very young, but Zuckerberg did not start an operating system company. And so there's almost, so I think that is sort of this strange paradox around where people want to say, well, we want to copy what's worked, but what's worked has been doing original things. Whereas in globalization, you can copy what's worked, and what's worked has been copying other people who've copied things that have worked. So it's sort of very, very different. But that's an ongoing debate we have with all of our LPs, and we basically end up trying to do as much as we can within the constraint of them. But the way I think about it is we ultimately have to, if we get positive returns, your LPs come back. If you don't, you don't. One of the subtle venture capital things